Welcome to The Thriving Mama, the podcast that teaches you not just how to survive, but to thrive in motherhood. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie Davis. Do you ever watch other people's lives and think that they make it look easy? I've known these people too, and they aren't the fake ones that you see on social media, but people who are truly thoughtful and intentional with their lives through the good and the bad times, and they don't hide any of it. A second thought that you might have about that person is that maybe you'd like to be like them, but you either don't know how they do it or are scared to attempt to try, which are both very real and valid points that many of us experience on this journey of self growth and transformation. This is why today I'm breaking down the reality of self-growth and transformation and what it looks like so you can have a better understanding and know that while it's not easy, it can be the start of the life that you truly desire. The three big points that we're going to be talking about today are the process of self-growth and transformation is not linear and it's constantly happening in the background. How to embrace the balance between surrender and taking action, especially when you have goals you want to achieve. And lastly, and most important, cultivating your awareness is the key to this entire journey. If you're confused about where to start addressing your own health, or you've tried all of the things and nothing has worked, I offer podcast listeners a free global health check-in where I'll evaluate your physical, mental, and emotional health and provide useful resources to help you along your journey. You'll find that link in the show notes. In episode 44, I talked about how personality traits and trauma can hold us back, and I explained my own personal story. Today, I'm going to dive into what self-growth and transformation look like in reality or real time. As I said at the start of episode 44, taking a good hard look at yourself is scary and challenging. And it's usually one of the things that prevents us from ever attempting these endeavors. And like I said in the intro, we see other people out there in the world and they're making it look easy. And I can tell you it is not. And as I said in the intro, I know a lot of these people, and these people are different. I want to say they're ahead of a lot of us in many ways on this journey of life. And they've addressed the things that we're talking about. They've addressed, their self-growth challenges. And it's interesting because when people think about self-growth, they don't always think about trauma, but they are extraordinarily tied together. Sometimes, yes, you can pick a skill and learn that skill and become great at it, and that is self-growth. But where true transformation comes from is looking at where we've been in our past or things that have happened to us and taking accountability, taking responsibility and addressing them, and then our lives changing for the better. That is really kind of where the rubber meets the road with self-growth. And like I said before, it is scary. We often don't know where to start. It can be extraordinarily challenging. I think I may have mentioned in that last episode that, when I first started, I started in talk therapy because that was probably the most prevalent option at the time. But still today, it is something that people, kind of gravitate to because, now that there's a little more talk about mental health post-pandemic, there's a lot more options now for talk therapy. And that's great. But like I said, I ended up seeking out other options because I didn't feel like I was really changing as a person. It felt good to get things off my chest and talk to somebody. And they gave me some frameworks to work through, like I had mentioned, but I didn't feel like real transformation was happening. Some understanding was happening, but real transformation wasn't happening. And I can say I've never been one of the people to kind of just sit back and just let life happen. When once my interest in my journey was peaked, I was going to keep on going after it until I found what I thought was the best option for me and the people that I worked with. And that's what led me to doing the, heart math and the holographic manipulation therapy, or HMT. But, that was a very, very long journey. And I explained much of what that looked like in the previous episode. So if you haven't heard that, I would say listen to episode 44, because I did talk about, somewhat of my childhood. And then I talked about a divorce, and where I, had to choose myself for the first time in my life. And then, how that kind of evolved into where I'm at today. So I went through that part of the journey. But I really want you to understand exactly what's happening, kind of in real time. And the last year, 2024, is very fresh in my mind. And so I'm going to walk you through kind of chronologically what happened there, and what my day to day looked like, what my feelings and emotions were. And I can tell you, I was all over the place. There was some crazy days. I had some crazy days. So we're going to start there. So we're going to tell a story going back to January of 2024. I was super excited, ready to hit the ground running, because I had, in 2023, released a lot. I had released many things that weren't serving me, including jobs and some friendships, and like that was the consulting and some of the other I was working in somebody else's practice. None of it was serving me, and I wasn't feeling fulfilled, and I could feel this inner, I don't want to say angst, but it was a frustration that was growing. And so 2023, I decided to take charge, and 2024 was going to be my year of major implementation. And it started off that way. And it was great because I had lots of women in my program, the Thriving Mama, or the Core Transformation program. So that was great. I had women who were, started at the end of of the previous year, and had, journeyed into 2024. And I was, guiding and working with them through that process, and everything was great. And then I think, there were many episodes where I touched on what happened in 20, or I should say, February. It was February of 2024, where like I said, I had lots of death just happening. One of my good friends, her father passed away, death of two children. And I went into great depth of that in some episodes last year. And so, yeah, I mean, February was really, really difficult. And I found myself after thinking that I was in a really, really good place, because I had always prided myself on being steady. And now I know that that's not necessarily a good thing. Yeah, not necessarily a good thing. If it's good to be able to handle your emotions, but it's not good to suppress them. And I think I was somewhere in the space of doing both, because I didn't not feel my emotions, but I don't think I was feeling them fully. And that ends up as, things eventually blow up and come to the surface. They always, always do. I will tell you that. If you ever feel yourself, this is just a little tip, if you ever feel yourself actively pushing something down, you need to address it. You need to address it sooner than later, because eventually it will come back to haunt you, and it's going to come back in a big way. And that happened to me multiple times this year. And this February incident was just the beginning of it. And so I think I had mentioned in those previous episodes that I spent a lot of time crying, didn't know why, because I was, like I said, pretty even. And I was just like, what is going on here? And I realized that so much of it was, wrapped up in my own personal story and my own personal journey. Well, my heart hurt extraordinarily for my friends and the people in my community who had lost loved ones. I guess I realized I had not fully dealt with some of my own loss, and that was in the form of miscarriages. But also, when I reflected back, I had a lot of loss that I don't think I had fully processed. The loss of certain relationships, certain friendships, life transitions. Life transitions are something that you often hear me talk about, but they can be hard. Anything that's a life transition, marriage, divorce, birth, death, job, no job, moving. There's so many things that are life transitions. And I had many in a space of about a decade. And it, I think, weighed on me, and I didn't fully process it. So I had all of this coming to the surface, and it took a good 6 weeks of me having a lot of crying and not understanding and crying and not understanding. There were days when I was completely paralyzed by it. There were days when like I knew I had tons of work to do, but I couldn't do it. I just sat there and I curled up on my couch and cried, or got in the bathtub and I was crying. There was there were many, many days like that in that 6 week period. And so I felt like I had a big emotional boulder sitting in my lap and I couldn't get it off of me. And so that made me do some massive introspection and, kind of self-awareness, looking at myself. And it's interesting because this is a practice that I have. I have a 5-minute journal. I'm constantly kind of scanning myself throughout the day or a week, and reflecting on, weeks and months and years, and, trying to see where I can, find where there were hints that I should be aware of. And so, like I said, it dawned on me that I had some losses that I hadn't fully processed, and just like transitions that I hadn't fully processed and integrated into my body. So that was a challenge. And like I said, I spent lots of days, instead of doing, the work that I was supposed to be doing, if I would honestly, I'm being 100% straight with you. I would be seeing patients at, let's say, starting at 10 o'clock in the morning. I might spend from like 8:30 to 9:30, I was crying, and then I'd get myself together, clear the space for the appointments, see the patients, and then, just let it all out again after I was done. That's what many of those days looked like. And I should say, I was lucky in the fact that I started to cultivate a great community of women around me here. And I knew that they had my back and I could talk to them, and they supported me through this, and also reflected some thoughts back to me about what they thought were going on. And that was really helpful too, because sometimes it's not always for you, it's not always easy for you to be the one with the awareness. Sometimes it's somebody who knows you, they have the awareness and can reflect it back at you. And so that's another important piece of this puzzle. And so I ended up, I got through to March. Things seemed better. I had lots of up and down days. I will say work was a struggle in February and March because of that. I felt like I was having to push through those days. And that's okay. There are times in our lives where we have to push ourselves to keep going. And that's okay. I feel like I was carrying all of that, the burden of the miscarriages and some of the losses that I had experienced. It was grieving. I mean, for the most part, when I look back at that time now, it was grieving and transformation. And so at the end of it, when I had realized all of this and I had processed it and I had integrated it, and I will also say during that time, I did quite a bit of HMT on myself, and, heart math, all of the tools that I had. I did a lot of that. I reached out to some friends for help too, friends who are also experienced in many of these modalities, because I knew I couldn't do it all alone. And so that, in real time, this was happening. March came, things were going, I started making some changes on my business, I started having more of that positivity. But one of the things that had shifted was just my day-to-day being. I tend to be a very positive and glasses half full type of person. But I felt myself feeling more of the depth and breadth of my emotions. Like I had times where, like, sadness would strike me. And I would have times where like great, happiness would strike me and just fun. I could feel myself loosening up too. I think over time, especially as you're adulting, you get more uptight. And so one of my friends, one of the friends that I was working with the trauma, she said to me, she's like, you need to dance. She's like, she's one of those people who has guides and she's like, you need to dance. She's like, my guides are telling me that you just need to dance. And I was like, okay, whatever. I didn't think anything of it. But I can say this, like she said that to me. And I was like, yeah, I probably did used to kind of hang out and, just kind of boogie around the room and whatnot. But I did not, I just, I, it left that I lost that part of myself somewhere. And I also just didn't see myself jumping into it and being like, hey, let's let's shake it out or dance or whatever. So I ended up, just sitting with that. Lots of times I think we hear things and somebody tells you to do something. You're like, I have to do it now. I just let it sit with me and naturally come. And I will say, lo and behold, I would maybe the last, not even half of the year, I would say the last quarter of the year, probably September through December, I would find myself like there would be music on, I'd be cooking in the kitchen and I'd feel myself kind of like wiggling a little bit and dancing. Or, sometimes if there was music on and I was cleaning, I would just kind of like bust out into a dance. And I would also say I used to sing a lot. And I was really into, like, I enjoyed singing and I didn't do that either. And I found myself singing to these songs and doing, just more expression and, movement and singing are often joyful, it's expression of joy. It can also be expressions of other things too, like, pain and sadness, the whole gamut of emotions. But for me, it always was that positive expression. And so I found that came back into my life, but it was like that balance of just letting it come to me rather than me saying, hey, I got to start doing this right now. So that happened. And so we'll kind of rewind back to where we were at. We were in kind of like March, April timeframe. I had a retreat that I was getting ready to go into. And like I said, March and April were good. I was feeling pretty steady, emotionally more balanced, feeling all of the emotions, but there wasn't all of the kind of the crying and just the release that had been happening in the earlier part of the year. And I went to that retreat that I did an episode of the podcast about. I think I did a couple. And when I was at that retreat, I think I explained to y'all that everyone there was having these massive transformations. It was a business. It was supposed to be for my business, but it was interesting. I knew that we were going to end up doing a lot more kind of trauma work, self-growth and transformation type of work than it was going to be direct business. Because if you are kind of not at your emotional best, it really does bleed over into your business. And that's something I'm going to be talking about a lot more in 2025. It bleeds over into other areas of your life, but especially into your business. And so all of us who were there really wanted to get ourselves out of the way. We wanted to, kind of show up as our best selves and, be the next best version of us. And so all the people going through that transformation were doing, all their things and having massive transformations. And then there's me again, like I think I spent 75 or 80% of it crying because some of the stuff from February came back up in a different form. It came back in the form of like a disconnect with my husband that was a result of some of these losses. And so I was like, that was an epiphany and aha moment that I had to work through. But it was interesting because it was the first time in my life, my body became so overwhelmed that I couldn't have other people really, like many people close to me. Like it was the very last day of this retreat. And while I will say it was absolutely amazing, I would do it over again 100 times out of 100. But at the end of it, everyone was like, hugging and taking pictures and exchanging numbers. And there's me off to the side. And I just couldn't. Like, I was holding on to so much heaviness that I just could not do that. And I was being honest and authentic. And I basically I pulled myself out, but I didn't force myself. I did not force myself to go do all of like the exchanges and the, kind of the hugging. Like I just didn't really want anyone else's energy near me at that time because I was so overwhelmed with what was going on inside me. And some of my friends who were there that know me pretty well were aware of that and they honored that too. And it was cool because afterwards, I told the story earlier in the year, but we went into the forest and that was exactly what I needed. I just needed to kind of dispel some of that energy. One of my friends did some work on me as we walked through the forest, and that was incredibly helpful. Just like that grounding experience was huge. And so she helped me through that moment. But on the airplane home and then the next month, so that was May. I want to say May into early June, I was unpacking everything that happened there. And I'd say still to this day, there's still little pieces that I'm unpacking that will show up because I'm aware. And I'm going to get into that in a couple more points. But um, yeah, there was a lot of unpacking. And then with that came a lot of crying again. So there was a lot of like crying and the release and a lot of journaling for me through this transformation. Like, I don't understand why this is happening. And then I was also navigating it with my husband and kids throughout all of this, navigating it through with my husband and kids, I should say. But when I came home from that, there was like, I had a direct call from the universe, God, spirit. You need to, talk to your husband. You guys need to talk about these things, work on these things, move through these things. And so that was kind of the focus for that next 6 to 8 weeks. There was a lot of that. Again, lots of, like I said, I kind of felt like it was Groundhog's Day where I was reliving like having days where I knew I had to do things, but I was crying and just feeling all the emotions and the overwhelm. But I was, I was working through it and I could handle it, which was really interesting. It was a little bit different than earlier in the year. But yeah, I mean, my husband I would be in the bathtub, my husband would come in and I'd be like, why are you crying again? And like, it was really, I think it was challenging for him because I know he wanted to help and we talked about it and we talked about ways he could help. But working through these things together is like a dynamic in which you have to hold your own space and allow another person to hold their own space and then collectively work through something together. And so there's give and take in that process. And so that was kind of May and part of June for us. And I have to say, I think I've mentioned this before, like our relationship came out the other side even better. But that was a transformation too, because a lot of it was like me, like being perimenopausal and accepting myself for what I am now and not what I was in my 20s and 30s, and what I am, in my later 40s. And so that was a process. That was part of this whole thing too, that I was going through, is accepting this new version of me, because not only was this new version happening on the inside, but it started happening exteriorly too. Like I could see physical changes and I didn't love it. And my husband, was like, he's like, I, still think you're beautiful. You're, this, that, whatever. I'm like, but if I don't feel that, then it's hard. And so that was part of the disconnect too. So there was a lot that happened through that. There were, I had some days again that were great and they just flowed normally, where I'd wake up in the morning, felt great, did, kids to school, did my work, did whatever meetings I had to do, saw patients and, got the kids and made dinner and went to bed and everything was beautiful. But I had other days again where like all of a sudden, it would hit me, the subconscious part would hit me and I would, just have a really difficult day. And, whether it was crying or just sitting there, not necessarily understanding why, those things happen. I also would have, just little nuggets and realizations happen. Things that, my subconscious, things that coming from my subconscious to my consciousness, realizing that I needed to deal with certain things. I'm trying to think of one. Off the top of my head so I can give you an example. Okay. One of the things that I knew I had to work on was an aspect of kind of self-worth, and it was being accepted by other people. And so that was like, again, so when those things happen, when those things come to the surface for me, I do any one of the many modalities that I have for HMT. I always start off with I do the same thing for myself as what I do with patients. So I start off with creating a safe space, do some heart math, get my body and my brain into it, increase the oxytocin and neuroplasticity. And then I dive into, kind of the whys and the traumatic aspect, and, how I got to thinking that. How did that become some part of my identity that I needed to change? And so I did that work kind of more exclusively in the second round. I would say the first, kind of bout earlier in the year was a lot of just crying and releasing that had to be done. This time was more about the releasing, but also awareness and transformation and changing, like the actual progression and growth. And so I ended up yeah, I worked through that, and that was hard. And then, we kind of, life started just flowing. And it was interesting because you would think, while all of this was happening, that there would be like negative, there would be a negative impact on my life or my business, but quite the opposite was happening. In real time, my business was growing as I was becoming more vulnerable and authentically myself. My business was growing in ways that I could have never imagined. Many different things started happening in the middle of last year to the end of last year that are going to be coming into the practice. And I should say my business this coming year, 2025, or I should say now that we're in 2025, the actual year of 2025, but there are some things that are going to be happening, really cool things, just things that, like I said, kind of came into my awareness. And so, and I allowed it. A lot of it is opening up yourself to being vulnerable and, allowing things to come to you rather than trying to push. So that's going to be one of the next points we talk about. But that was a lot of what happened. And in these processes too, I think I experienced two ego deaths. The first ego death was surrounding all of that loss. Like I feel like I had to hit emotional rock bottom in order to, kind of like the cliche, the phoenix rising out of the ashes, but that's what it was for me. And then the second one happened later in the year, just with a lot of awareness. And I think it was a culmination of all of the self-work. I realized that, even though a lot of like in the past, my sources of validation in my life and my self-worth were external. I felt like now I'm like, I'm not like that at all. I derive everything internally, but there were still a few nuggets, and those rose to the surface in the last quarter of the year. And so I spent that time working on these little, nuggets of not feeling worthy, not being good enough, all of these things. And it was interesting because, like I had mentioned in some previous recent episodes that I've never been a person, in my adult life that's truly lacked self-confidence. I mean, sure, every once in a while you get a little shaky about certain things, but I always show up with a good amount of confidence. And I was like, what is going on here? So it was allowing for that to happen, allowing for that space to happen. And as I looked back on 2024, I could see how all of this was kind of spiraling into where I was at the end of the year, and how I went through this massive transformation, but it was filled with ups and downs. And there were good days and bad days. There were chunks of good days and chunks of bad days. But it was interesting because, I ended at the end of the year, like I was so tired because 2024 was a very, very rough year, emotionally, physically, mentally, in all the ways. But I was I was so happy and so grateful at the end of the year. I just needed to take time off, which I did at the end of the year. I was kind of MIA. And then unfortunately, I got sick last week, but it was my body, I think, just again, just finishing the purging and transformation process. And it was really interesting because I'm appreciative of what I went through. I'm grateful for what I went through and that I allowed it to happen and that I was willing to look at the dark aspects of myself and my personality and not just the good, which is what I talk a lot about in episode 44. And so um, it's interesting, like to just look back and reflect and see how it all happened, and see that day to day it looks different. When you do, like, for instance, when I was doing the episodes, the transformations and doing the HMT work on myself, we talk about the process of shedding, and that's where you go through, you do the work, and sometimes most of the time after you feel calm and peaceful and happy, most of the time it's really positive experiences. During a session, you might yawn a lot, but then after the fact, like later in the day, you might be tired. Some people get energized, some people get tired, kind of depending upon the work that we did and how much we've done. But for me, that any of the above can happen. You just have to make sure, that you're hydrated, you have electrolytes, all of that, giving yourself space, and being aware too that, things can happen, but oftentimes not necessarily on the first day, but in the days after, you'll, be going about your business. And then all of a sudden you'll have like this boom, like a negative feeling might come back. And that is your subconscious and what your previous default was, what your previous baseline was, trying to push back and say, hey, I don't want to change. And then, you have to be cognizant of it. And that's where we do the exercise where we say, I release you with love. And you do it intentionally and you repeat it, for 1 to 2 minutes. And that really does help. But then sometimes you kind of have to go back in and do a little bit more work. And so I was cognizant of all of this. And because it was really weird, like when I first started going through this, I want to say like in the May to June timeframe, and then kind of September, October, I had a lot of these where I'd do the work, I'd be feeling great. And then all of a sudden I would have just like, like, why is this happening? And I allowed the space for that to happen. And I'm glad I did, because then I could see the areas where I needed to keep working and keep pursuing. Right. So that was the year of 2024 in a nutshell. And I just wanted you to see and understand that I always say healing is a journey, and I believe that, but it kind of happens in chunks and it ebbs and it flows. Like a lot of people think, oh, if I'm going to do the self-growth, I have to do it, for the rest, whatever it is that you're doing, I have to do it all the time. You don't necessarily have to do it. There's no right or wrong way for any of this to look. For me, it seems to be like I do it in like weeks at a time. It'll be like maybe 4 weeks or 6 weeks or 8 weeks. And then I let it all kind of marinate and, take hold. And I see where I'm at. I'm constantly checking in on myself and seeing where I'm at. So that's another, important piece of the puzzle, is that self-assessment. But something, one of the major points that I wanted to highlight is that it is not a linear process, and it's always happening in the background. And that's what this shedding is. It's the linear part is pretty self-explanatory, but I want you all to understand that, like, there's no blueprint for this. You just like, one of the tenets of functional medicine is individuality. And in anything that I do inside my business and practice is going to be individual to, my needs, for like when I'm working on myself, and then when I'm working with other people, individual to their needs. I don't ever like work with somebody and say, hey, this is the way it has to be. No, we work with you. We work with your life. We work with your needs. There's there, like I said, there's give and take. There's, we're on this journey together. And so I think that one of the obstacles to starting this journey for many people is that unknown. I don't know how to start. All you have to do is just pick a modality and start doing it. And if somebody tells you you have to do it a specific way, I would run away, because in no healing modalities do you have to do anything technically. I get very frustrated when I see things out there, either programs or the way that, other people work, and they're like, you have to do it this way. This is the only way. I don't adhere to that at all. I don't believe in that at all. I think there needs to be fluidity. I think that you need to have a framework, but I also think that there needs to be, like I said, fluidity and flexibility in that framework. And then also, as you're moving through the process, keeping the goal in mind, and you're always working towards that goal. And so that is, kind of the difference between the way, I'll just say the way that I work and the way that a lot of other people work. But like I said, it's not a linear process. It does not have a blueprint, and it is always happening in the background. So for people who haven't gone through any kind of, self-growth work or trauma work or anything like that, they probably get little signs. They probably have dreams and because I'll have people say, oh, I've got all these vivid dreams, and they're usually pretty bad. They're ugly. That's a huge sign that there's something there. Your body your subconscious is constantly telling you that there's something that you need to address right there. They will say that, we've talked about this before. It can manifest as an illness. It most often manifests as an illness when you need to address something. There are so many different ways. If you keep on repeating the same story in your life, for people who have had lots of money and then they have no money, and then they have lots of money and they have no money, that is that's, screaming. It reeks of the fact that you need to address something, from a emotional and traumatic standpoint. So there are lots of, signs, and you just need to be aware, which that is, kind of one of our next pieces that we need to address is the awareness. Because with anything, you need to know, like I said earlier, cultivating your awareness is the key to this entire journey. And I would say that's kind of point B to the next point A, is like embracing the balance between surrender and taking action, especially when you have goals you want to achieve. Because most of us in life aren't just sitting there just like going through the motions day to day without thinking, hey, I want to do this. Like most of us are like, I, want to get myself healthier, or I want to grow my business, or I want to, take on like some kind of physical feat, like an Ironman. But you have to be able to, have a balance between the surrender and the taking action. And that was I think my theme of 2024 was surrender, because we live in a very driven, masculine, push, 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 action taking society. And we don't often sit in and rest with that surrender. And that was something that was a skill. It was a skill that I had to learn. I started kind of thinking about it October, November of 2023, and it started coming into my awareness. And the more that I allowed it to come into my life, the better things started happening. But 2024 for me was a year of surrender and being aware and not pushing. And so I think a lot of people think if you're high achieving, you have to always be taking action and not, being involved in that process of surrender. And I would disagree, because I feel like the beauty and the subtlety and the magic is in that surrender process. And that doesn't mean you're giving up. It just is allowing you to be, and sometimes letting things come to you, letting things happen for you, instead of constantly trying to push and control everything that's happening. Because that was me for the vast majority of my life, was trying to push and control everything that happened in my world. So it's it is I would like, I called surrender a skill. It is a skill. You have to, it feels very uncomfortable at first. If you are a person who is either a perfectionist, or you're driven, or you're goal oriented and achievement oriented, it feels extraordinarily uncomfortable. Your body is going to be internally screaming when it's happening. It's going to be like, no, 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 I need to be doing something. And it'll show up in your mind as, um, guilt, like, oh, you should be doing this, you're not good enough because you're not working right now. Those are the little things that'll happen in your mind as this is happening, the surrender process. And you can say, again, one of those things, I really should live with love. You can say, this is not my thought, this is not who I am. You can say something like, my surrender is, it's basically allowing God, the universe, spirit, to, come to you and work with you. So there are lots of ways that you can reframe it so that it's a positive. And the more you do that, the better things are going to, go and flow for you. And so for me, a lot of the last half of 2024 was was balancing that surrender process and just allowing things to take shape and mold, rather than pushing. And it was interesting. I'll give you a good example of one thing that happened to me during the surrender process. Like I said, my practice kept on growing and expanding, even though I wasn't really I wasn't like driving it and pushing that. I had, I think most people had known, I work with, for the vast majority of my practice, it's women and children. I work with some men too, but most of the time it's husbands, brothers, sons, uncles, grandfathers, that type of thing, of the women I'm working with. But all of a sudden, in the middle of the year, I started getting men. It was in my discovery calls. It was all men, which was cool. And they weren't related to the people I was working with. They just found me. And I was, at first I was really confused. I'm like, why is this happening? What do I do? And then I was like, I love this. I'm just going to go with it. We're going to, I'm working with them, and I let it happen. And it ended up being pretty amazing because and I think this is why it happened, when I was at that retreat in May, where, I kind of had that major kind of breakdown experience of like the emotions. It was the first time I'd ever been in a healing experience, or a transformation or trauma self-growth experience with men. It's always been all women. And in our group, there was 20 of us, and it was about 50-50-ish. I think there might have been a few more women than men, but it was pretty close to 50-50. And it was awesome. It was awesome to be in the space with men who were willing to step up and say, hey, I'm, secure enough with myself to cry in front of these women, or, have just a primal release of emotion, like fear or anger or rage in front of these women. And it was really, really cool and pivotal and transformational for me in that moment. But I didn't realize it was actually flowing through into my life and my work as well. So that was really cool. And so that was another kind of one of those like reflections that I had. And yeah, I was like, but when it first started happening, I'm like, why are all these dudes coming into my practice? So it was really, it was cool. And that actually is going to play into, like I said, 2025, because I am working with a lot more men now, and there's going to be some changes in that aspect. So you receive so many gifts, and I firmly believe you receive what you need when you're willing to surrender and be open and lead with your heart, instead of, being in your mind all the time. And so that was something cool that happened to me. And then, the taking action part of it is like, when you do get these little nuggets, like I did, with the men coming into my practice, it caused a shift, and it caused a change. And now that's going to be reflected in my practice and my business in 2025. And so I'm really excited about that. So it's like, that's a perfect living example. But like I said, this didn't happen like in a week. a day or a week or overnight. This happened in a period of months. That was about a 5 to 6 month shift. And so that's what I want people to understand, that lots of times we, especially in the society that we live in, it's instant gratification. And that does not happen in reality. Instant gratification is not really a thing. I mean, if you want to live your life like that, it's going to be a very shallow life, and a very frustrating life. If you want everything, in real time and having instant gratification. But if you're willing to put in the work and be aware and embrace things like surrender versus taking action and cultivating your awareness. Like I would not have, I wouldn't have had all of these great things happen if I was not aware to the things that were being presented to me and how they connected to each other and how it was, helping, write my journey. And so that awareness is really important. And that's the last kind of main point that we're going to talk about. And that awareness is just, first, it starts off with self-awareness and self-reflection to be like, is the thing I'm thinking or the thing I'm feeling what I want? And is it really me? So you can start off with those things. It's also being aware of how you impact other people and how you impact the greater world. So you could have, when I'm kind of talking and conversing with people, especially one-on-one, I'm very aware of how my words and my body language are being perceived by the other person. I always want to make sure that they're comfortable. I want to make sure that they feel heard. I want it to be a positive experience. So I'm always kind of aware of that. And I feel like the longer I'm on this planet, the more difficult it is for me when I'm opposite somebody who doesn't do that. When they're just like not, I mean, you can tell they're not listening, or they're looking down at their phone or their Apple Watch, or you can tell they're just thinking about what they're going to say next instead of really intentionally listening to you. Or they just, the conversation is always coming back to them. There are lots of ways you can see this, but, that's another way you can, kind of perceive awareness, is like, you can just watch what's happening in interactions. You not only with like, that was an example that I would use for like when I'm meeting with a friend or a colleague or something like that, or even a stranger, a new person that I'm meeting for the first time. Same thing. The same thing applies. But you can also see that in your relations with your family. So your kids, your parents, your spouse, your, significant other, your partner, whoever it is, extended family members, you can see, awareness there too. Like I now feel like it's almost a curse, because I can pick up when people lack self-awareness just by the way that they talk and the way that they behave in the world. And it can be really frustrating, because you kind of want to say to everybody, how can you be saying that? Like, how can you say something that seems so like tone deaf? Like look at the people who you're in front of and what you just said. That can be a challenge. And that's something that I work on all the time, because there's a part of me that, it's like, am I not using my voice if I don't speak up to everybody? But then I also don't want to be, that jerk who speaks up to everybody. So, I mean, that's a thing too. So it's like, what is normal? I think it's normal for us to have these kinds of thoughts. I was going to say, I don't think it's normal to like address every person's, like when you can tell that they're kind of, like I said, tone deaf or not self-aware. I don't think it's a good idea to go like, jumping on that with everybody. But if it's somebody in your life who, might be open to having a conversation, it might be worth having a conversation. I recently did that in December with a family member, because they said something to me that hurt my feelings. And in that instant, I didn't say anything, but a couple days later I did. And I felt so relieved. And I framed it in a positive way, kind of a kind way. Like, I know you didn't intentionally do this, because I truly believe that this person didn't intentionally do it. They were just having a reaction of their own. And again, it was like lacking self-awareness. And I pointed that out. I'm like, I just wanted to make you aware that your reaction made me feel bad. And so Life is a work in progress, and none of us are perfect. And I don't think we should expect perfection. I think we should just expect to show up as the best version of ourselves that we can be on that given day. And so with that, I leave you again with the fact that you can do it. I know you can do it. And if you ever have any questions, always feel free to reach out.
If you made it this far, I truly appreciate you. Remember, knowledge is just the beginning. Taking action is what truly sparks change. If you're overwhelmed and don't have enough energy to make it through the day, I invite you to book a free 20-minute coaching call with me. It's a no-obligation chat where we can discuss your health goals and how I might be able to help you achieve them. Visit the link in the episode description to book that call. Until next time, keep striving for wellness, and remember, you have the power to not just survive, but thrive in motherhood.